doctor Peter Goldwasser, que nos presentará una serie de sus investigaciones que pues, pueden ser no solamente aplicables de una manera universal, sino creemos también a la realidad mexicana. Peter, por favor.
Hello, and thank you so much to come on a Friday, late afternoon, to listen to a talk on negative emotions, but there's a positive aspect to it. It's self-regulation of negative emotions. How can you down-regulate fear, disgust, anger, and envy? Now, as you probably know, throughout my career, I have made a distinction between goals and plans, okay? And mostly in the psychology of motivation and social psychology, this distinction is made, so if somebody says, my plan is to save a lot of money next month, that's actually a goal, okay, but he calls it a plan, and then some people use the word goals for plans, and it's a big mess, okay? So I try to kind of clarify things by making a conceptual distinction between goals and plans. And so goals, in my reasoning, writing, and conceptualizations and theories are intentions to reach certain outcomes. So for instance, I want to eat more healthy food, so I eat more vegetables. That's a goal, okay? Now, it can be a desired performance, can be a desired outcome. So you say, I want to be particularly fast in finishing something. That would be, a performance, and the outcome would be, I want to come up with a paper that everybody understands or something like that. Now, when we know, from research in motivation science, when people have goals, implementing these goals or attaining these goals is not that likely, even when you are highly committed, okay, and try really hard. The correlation between a strong intention and an actual realization of the intention is only 0.3, okay, it's not very strong. And then so I argued that you have to intensify what's going on. So you have to add a plan if you want to have a better chance to realize your goal. Yeah. And for instance, when you have the goal to eat more healthy food, move over here. Yeah. Does that help? I move over there. Okay, good. So, yeah, now it's better. So if you have the goal to eat more vegetables, then you could add a plan, and the plan specifies so when, where, and how you want to realize your goal, okay? So you could find a situation, a critical situation. So if situation Y arises, then I will perform response C. So when I sit down in my favorite restaurant, then I will order a vegetarian meal. So you see, now we are not talking about outcomes anymore. And I want to reach this outcome very strongly, okay? Now it's a strategy to specify that you will use that and that situation to perform that and that goal-directed action, and that turns out to, facilitate goal attainment to a large degree. Now, if SAM plans are subordinate to goal intentions, as they specify the when, where, and how a set goal has to be put into action, okay? So first there is a goal, a commitment to a goal, and the plan is added, so you're going to reach your goal more readily, more easily. And the most effective plans we found out are if-SAM plans that link a critical situation with a goal-directed response. Like the critical situation is sitting down, in a favorite restaurant and you're exhausted and everything, and then you will order a vegetarian meal. Now, why does that work so well? Why does that facilitate goal attainment? So over the years, we found out that this if-then plans create an associative link between the specified critical situation, the if part, and the to be performed goal-directed response, the then part. Now, by creating this if-then plans, you actually link associatively the mental representation of a critical situation with the respective relevant goal-directed action. And these kinds of links are very strong and make the critical situation more easily detectable. We recognize it. Oh, this is now I have to watch it when the waiter comes and asks me what for the order. You also don't forget about it. So when you sit down, you know, oops, I need to order a healthy food. And there is also a readiness to attend to the critical situation. We found out when the critical situation is kind of hidden and it's not so easily detected that this is a critical situation, now I need to act. When you have formed a mental representation of an if-then link, it's easier for you to recognize the critical situation. It's here now, okay? Now, the control of the specified goal-directed behavior is by making if-then plans, you delegate the control to the critical situation. Now, when the critical situation arises, that is specified in the if part, the action becomes more immediate. Okay, it's easier for you to act fast. It's also easy to act efficient. That means even when you are burdened by high cognitive load, you know, so you have an argument with the person you went out for dinner, okay, and no longer needs a conscious intent. So you don't have to tell yourself, oh, there was something I wanted to do when I sit down. Oh, okay, I remember now. Yeah, it's ordering healthy food. So it runs off outside of awareness, fast, without effort, and people call this automatic action control. Yeah, so you more or less automate the initiation of the goal-directed action. Now, what about emotions? So a few years ago, we said, well, if you can use that to control your behavior, can you also use if-then plans to control negative emotions, emotions you do not want to have, okay? So if you say, if you have the goal of, I do not want to get disgusted, okay? And you add an if-then plan, and when I see a disgusting picture or whatever, then I will ignore it, okay? Does a simple if-then plan like this help you to down-regulate disgust, okay? And when we started with this kind of research, with emotion control research, we thought, okay, let's pick an emotion that is most hard to regulate, down-regulate, okay? And we went through the literature and learned and discussed this hard to down-regulate, in particular for women, okay? And it turns out that they are even more disgusted by stimuli men hardly get disgusted by. And so we recruited, okay, female participants, research participants, and we trained them in rapidly responding to the so-called SAM scales. Have you ever heard of the self-assessment mannequin scales? Well, there is usually 5 pictures next to each other. And for instance, in the arousal scale, the guy on the left is exploding, okay? And the guy on the right is, okay, yeah, normal. And then you have to mark, you know, how you feel, more exploding or calm, yeah? And under these 5 mannequins, they call them in the literature, there's a 9-point scale, yeah? And then you can express your arousal by marking, you know, the point that is the closest to the guy who is exploding, yeah, when you're highly aroused, okay? And then in this first study, we had 3 conditions. We had a control condition. They didn't get any instructions. They just had to watch, the disgusting pictures. And then there was a goal intention condition with a goal to downregulate, to disgust. And there was an if sampling condition. And I'll show you in a second how these goals and plans look like. Now, they all had to perceive or look at 45 IAPS pictures. Now, IAPS is the International Affective Pictures System, okay? And there are more than 1,000 stimuli. And so we picked disgusting ones, 15 disgusting, 15 neutral, and they are classified in that IAPS picture system, and 15 pleasant ones, yeah? And then they had to watch these pictures, these 45 pictures, one after the other, and rate their feeling in a self-report scale after each picture via the self-assessment mannequins, okay? And it was the arousal mannequins. Now, here is a typical trial of the 45 trials, and it's a disgusting picture. So you see there's some blood somewhere, on the head, under the hair, okay? And we, in a pilot study, we checked, how disgusting these pictures are. And then we took the 15 most disgusting of the IAPS pictures. And we also selected 15 neutral and 15 pleasant pictures. And the pictures were presented after a fixation cross. The fixation cross was there for 800 milliseconds. Then the picture, 100 milliseconds, only very shortly. Then there was a mask that covered the picture for 200 milliseconds. And here you have the mannequins, okay? And this is the arousal scale. On the left, you see the poor guy is exploding. And on the right, he is very calm. And there is a 9-point scale, and you have to mark how you feel, yeah? And you do this 45 times. Now, the instructions in the control condition, no instructions. I just say, yeah, watch these pictures. And in the goal intention condition, they had the goal, I will not get disgusted, okay? And in the implementation intention condition, they had the goal, I will not get disgusted. And they added an if sampling. And if I see blood, then I will stay calm and relaxed, okay? Now, did this simple plan have an effect, okay? Well, if you look at the 3 conditions, the control, the goal intention, and the implementation intention, or if sampling condition, you see no effects on the neutral pictures, no effects on the pleasant pictures, but for the unpleasant picture, the disgusting picture, the bloody picture, you find a nice effect of implementation intentions, and even nicer, the mere goal intention, yeah, didn't have any effect, okay? So you had to add the if sampling, okay, in order to downregulate disgust. And so we were very happy when we had these findings, because they were showing, demonstrating nicely that a simple if sampling can downregulate an emotion that is particularly difficult to downregulate, which is disgust, okay? And we measured that aspect of evaluation, of experience of the emotion that is particularly hard to control, which is the arousal aspect, okay? And still we found a positive effect on downregulation by implementation intentions. Now, after we had found that one, we said, okay, let's move on to fear, okay? And this research was done at the University of Constance in Germany, and some of you probably know there is this large lake of Constance around the city, and there is more spiders than you want to see in your daily life. There are lots of spiders all over the place, okay? And so we thought, might be easy to find enough research participants who are suffering from spider fear. Now, can we help them with simple if-sam plans, okay? So our clinical psychologists with whom we collaborated, they were laughing. They said, we will never be able, to control a spider shrieking response. It's so automatic and fast with a simple if-then plan. So we said, oh, great. This is a perfect example, okay, where we can test the power of our if-then plans, okay? So we wanted to extend our prior findings, okay, on disgust. This time, we not only measured the arousal aspect of the response, okay, but also the valence and dominance. So they had to mark not only one scale with exploding guys, but also scale valence, okay. So was the left guy was smiling, okay, and then he got more sad, okay. And then dominance, people often say with fear, with certain emotions, one feature of that emotion is that you don't feel control anymore. You lose control, okay? And the scale we came up with is the so-called dominance scale, okay? So the guy who has control is a huge guy who stands there, yeah? And the person that doesn't have control is a tiny kid crouching, yeah? And so we thought, so we have these three scales this time, and let's check if we can, on each aspect of the affective response, get a down-regulation effect by if-then plans. Now, we did a pilot study, okay, where we, with 280 University of Constance students, and they had to fill out a questionnaire we used to find out whether they are afraid of spiders or not, okay? And then we only invited participants who scored 3 or 4 on a 4-point scale assessing spider fear, okay? They were high spider fear suffering individuals. And we also were looking for a sample of 17, because each condition had 17 participants, that had no spider fear at all. It was not easy to find these people at the University of Constance because there's so many spiders all over the place. Now, the materials were, again, IAPS pictures. We selected 15 neutral, 15 pleasant, and 4 spiders. And we took these 4 spiders out of 11 spiders previously rated as being highly arousing in a pilot study, okay? So we took all the spider pictures from the IAPS, but there aren't so many, so we added some, and then we did a pilot study, and so we could end up with 4 really scary spiders, okay? Okay, now, here is a picture of the design of the study. So we have participants with spider fear, we have a control group, a goal intention group, an implementation intention 1 and an implementation intention 2, and I'll get into that in a second. And we had participants without any spider fear, okay? Now, how did these implementation intentions look like? So the goal intention, as always, I will not get frightened, yeah? And then implementation intention was, and if I see a spider, then I will keep calm and relaxed. And another one is, and if I see a spider, that was the other condition, the other implementation intention condition, then I will ignore it, okay? And we had a big discussion at the time whether a simple ignore, okay, implementation intention will do the job. I was arguing it will do the job because if then planning moves action control to becoming automatic, and then when early on you already automatically ignore that spider, okay, there shouldn't be any spider fear response, yeah? And it should be even easier than looking at the spider and feeling the arousal coming up and then controlling it down. You still can do it because it's automatic when it's if-then planned, yeah? But the easier way is maybe then I will ignore it, okay? And there we have big discussions again. The more clinical-oriented people say, well, with ignore, that's not going to work. You need to kind of down-regulate it effortfully. But I said, well, if-then plan doesn't control action effortfully, it controls it automatically. So if you specify, if I see a spider, then I will ignore it, and you automatically ignore it to look right through the spider, then you shouldn't have any spider fear at all. So let's look at the results. So when you have a control condition with people with spider fear, the spider stimuli are here called unpleasant, they should be called spider stimuli, and you see there's a strong response in terms of negative affect, and negative affect this time adds up the 3 scales because we had 3 scales, okay? Now, when you have a goal intention condition to stay calm, no effect, yeah? You still see there is a big negative affect for spider pictures, okay? When you have ignore, it comes down, yeah? So the blue column comes down. And when you have calms, and I stay calm, comes down still significantly, but not as strong as the ignore, okay? So this ignore works the best. So when you have a critical stimulus that creates, you're afraid that it would create a negative emotion, the best plan is let's ignore it, yeah? And up to our research, ignore was kind of, no, that's not a good strategy, okay? But if you have an if-then ignore strategy, you automate the ignoring, and then it works pretty well. And then control without, these were these 17 participants who didn't have any fear of spiders. Now look at them, they are doing not better than our implementation intention ignore and our implementation intention stay calm participants. That means we turn with a simple if-then plan, we turn spider-phobic individuals into people who couldn't care less about spiders. Yeah, and that was very impressive, and was after all easy to publish. Yeah, because that's a very simple, effective strategy. Now, when we had sent these findings, had written them up and sent them to a journal, the critique was that you always argue about this automatic control or downregulation of emotion. Now, we don't believe this aspect, okay? It's automatic would mean that there is no consciousness involved, okay? And if you could show us that, and there is data in psychophysiology, that the physiological brain response to spider pictures in spider fearing individuals, if you can downregulate that one, then we believe your hypothesis that all of this runs off automatically, okay? Now, we checked the literature, okay, and there is, as I will explain to you in a minute, there's a certain area in the brain that is responsible for the shrieking response I was talking about when I talked about how spider-phobic individuals respond to spider pictures. So again, we took participants who were highly afraid of spiders, and then we had prepared materials. Took them again from the IAPS pictures, neutral pictures, pleasant pictures. So neutral pictures were gadgets from the kitchen, okay. Pleasant pictures were fruits and foods that were in the kitchen. And then there were 4 spiders, and they were taken again from these 19 spider pictures rated as highly arousing in our pilot study. Now, the pictures this time were presented twice. In the first, there were 2 blocks. In the first block, we assess the ERP, that's a brain response, okay? Event-related potential, that is a brain response immediately after the presentation of the stimulus, okay? And there was a second block, we showed the same pictures again, and then they have to rate them, on the mannequins, using the mannequins, again, with the 3 mannequin scales. Now, the control condition was I will not blink while looking at the pictures, because when you take brain data, yeah, that are checking on what happens in the brain when you look at a certain stimulus, there's some participants who just blink. They don't look at it because they don't like it. Yeah. And then, you need to control for that because you won't get a response because they don't look. Okay. So we told everybody, don't blink while looking at the pictures. Keep looking at the pictures. Yeah. Then in the goal intention, we added, I will not get frightened. Yeah. That's a goal. I will not get frightened. And in the implementation intention condition, we added, so we had the first one, the second one, and now was, and if I see a spider, then I will ignore it, okay? And then here you look at the negative affect, and again, we use the scales, the mannequins, okay? And we got, in the self-report, the unpleasant and also spider pictures, okay, were downregulated by the implementation intention. Now, what happened in the brain? Okay. Now, we used EEG and we observed a significant effect for spider pictures on a critical event-related potential, an ERP, and the event-related potential was taken 100 milliseconds after the presentation of the stimulus. So the reviewers couldn't argue anymore. There was consciousness involved. Because consciousness takes at least 300 milliseconds. Okay, you have to present the picture 300 milliseconds if you want to study the conscious judging of that stimulus. Okay, now we took our area of interest was the visual cortex, and the visual cortex is an area of the cerebral cortex that processes visual information. It is located in the occipital lobe, okay? Don't ask me to describe that in detail where this is and so on, and then I will point at my hand, which is not the right way to do it. Look it up by Googling, what these areas are, okay? And these are very established areas for visual processing, so that means visual perception, okay? When you are involved in visual perception, then these areas become activated. But we were interested in the activation after 100 milliseconds. That is the P100, they call that, the event-related potential, yeah? And as you can see here, the green line, you see, there is this response, shrieking response for the control participants. The blue line is the goal intention participants. It comes down a little bit, but not significantly. And it's completely wiped out for the implementation intention participants. That's the yellow line. So with this simple if-then plan, you can wipe out the shrieking response in the brain. After 100 milliseconds, it's already wiped out. Yeah. So it speaks strongly. This is one of our best studies showing that if-then plans work outside of awareness effectively, really fast. Okay. Good. Now, the next study was cognitive load. Another thing that we require from automatic action control is that it functions or works well even when you are busy with other things in your head, okay? When you think about other things, try to resolve problems and so forth, understand things. So we came up with a cognitive load study, and there we analyzed whether if-then plans still have the positive effects when a person's cognitive resources are taken up, okay? There is no room for further conscious thought, okay? And we had 44 female, again, with high spider fear, yeah, so the females are also more engaged in spider fear, not only in disgust, than men. And we had 3 conditions: a control condition, goal intention condition, if-then plan condition. And we had 34 IAPS pictures. and 15 neutral, 15 pleasant, and neutral and pleasant was the same as in the last study. And 4 spiders were taken from 11 spiders previously rated as being highly arousing in a pilot study. That was our pilot study where we always where we always checked whether this is are spiders that are fearful, creating fear. Okay. And then we had a load induction. Remember, when I showed how one of these trials was running off, okay? So there was a focusing slide, and then there was a picture, and then there was a mask, and so forth. And this time, in the fixation cross, the focusing stimulus was presented 800 milliseconds, and the fixation cross was filled with 4 numbers, okay? And participants were told that they should encode these numbers in memory, okay? Because we might ask them later what kind of numbers came up, okay? And the picture stayed on for 100 milliseconds, and they were masked by 200 milliseconds before the SAM scales appeared, okay? Now, this time, all of the participants had an additional task, which is encoding in memory, okay, these critical numbers. And then we wondered whether we still get a downregulation effect of implementation intentions. Our theory would say yes, because the downregulation is automatic. And so even if you are busy with other things in your mind, automaticity should run off nicely, okay? It's not hampered by other cognitive tasks. Now, again, goal intention was I will not get frightened. Implementation intention condition was, and if I see a spider, then I will keep calm and relaxed. And here are the findings, okay? And we this time had 3 scales. Here's the valence scale, where the mannequins are showing a nice face or a sad face, okay? And you can see that the unpleasant, these are the spider pictures, okay, are less unpleasant, okay, when you have the if-SAM plan I just showed you, okay? The same is with arousal, you see, it comes down again, okay? So you can downregulate the arousal that is produced by the spider pictures, okay? Even so, there is cognitive load. And when it comes to dominance, okay, where these mannequins, where this one guy is this large guy and strong dominant, so, and the other one is a little kid, okay? So you can see that even, okay, when you present spider pictures, okay, there is strong dominance feeling, so they don't feel small and fearful, yeah? So that aspect of evaluating a spider picture is also under if-SAM control. Now, after we had done these studies, we said, okay, why not move on, okay, to the control of anger? And when it comes to the control of anger, we thought we might use a combined self-regulation technique, not just implementation intentions. So we combined implementation intentions with mental contrasting by Gabriele, and a combination of 2 self-regulation strategies we thought might be particularly effective, and anger we thought is particularly hard to control. So we call this strategy MCII, mental contrasting combined with implementation intentions with if-SAM plans. And it's also referred to in the literature as WOOP, Wish Outcome Obstacle Plan. And we invited 44 German participants, and the procedure was very simple. Participants completed 20 items of the German version of the PANAS, the positive negative affect scale. And then the control and MCI participants had to recall a personal anger-related memory event, and then were asked to fill out the PANAS again, okay? So we wanted to check whether this memory really produced anger. And once we had done that, okay, people went through the MCRI procedure, and they were guided through this procedure. And the procedure is first creating the wish to control one's anger, then identifying the best outcomes that would result from attaining such a wish, and imagining this outcome, and then identifying an internal obstacle that might prevent from attaining the desired outcome, and imagining it, and then form an if obstacle, inner obstacles, then I will respond to overcome the obstacle plan. And then at the end of the experiments, participants had to describe the anger evoking event in detail. So we really got into this anger evoking past event. And then they filled out the panels again. Now what resulted was that in the control condition, when they had to get into the detail, okay, of describing the anger provoking event, then you see anger was shooting up, okay? But when you went through the MCRI exercise, okay, anger was still significantly higher, but not to that degree as it was in the control condition. So anger was significantly down regulated. Now, there was a second anger study we did, very similar to the first one. And the question here was, how does the classic intervention in the literature, which is an reappraisal intervention when it comes to anger, okay? So the clinical psychologist asks you, think about the situation where you got angry. Now reframe it, okay? Think of the person who made you angry in a different way, okay? And that usually helps, okay? So reviewers were asking, show us that MCII works equally well to reappraisal, or whether you need to combine MCII with reappraisal in order to get positive effects, downregulation effect. So the procedure was the same as in the first anger study. Materials were this time delivered on the computer, and the reappraisal instructions were taken from a very popular reappraisal publication by SAS, okay? And here are the findings, okay? So at baseline, there were no differences. And then after the getting into the detail of the anger event, okay, thinking about the details, you see there is an enormous increase in the control condition. In the reappraisal condition, it's still enormous, okay? So reappraisal didn't have much of an effect. Now MCII had an enormous effect, and reappraisal and MCII, you see that reappraisal didn't add anything to MCII. So MCII, we like that because that shows again, that it's working differently than this conscious thinking, this conscious control of emotions. So when you add to an automatic process a conscious, effortful process, why should you do that? Okay, so it speaks again to our assumption that MCII enhances automatic emotion control. Now the conclusions here. Now only participants who formed an if-SAM plan were able to reduce their negative emotions of fear, disgust, and anger as compared to the participants in the control condition and goal intention condition. So a mere goal, okay, of saving more money, of being more happy. And so, yeah, if you don't add a plan, don't get into the effort, okay, of setting that goal, okay? Now, it also turned out that emotion regulation via if-SAM plans is void of unwanted cognitive consequences. So it's not effortful in the sense that you cannot perform it, okay, when you are busy thinking about other things, okay? And that was our encoding study, memory encoding. Now, the reported research contributes to research on emotion regulation by analyzing new forms of antecedent and response-focused emotion regulation based on forming implementation intentions. Now, remember that we say antecedents, okay, means, okay, you make a plan so that when the critical stimulus comes up, you stay calm, okay, that's the antecedent. But we could show that also response focused, so I just ignore the spider, yeah, is equally effective, sometimes even more effective, okay, and that's a contribution to the emotion regulation research that is done in clinical psychology and other areas of psychology. Now, there's a new line of research, and I still have enough time to at least give you a taste of that. And it's downregulation feelings of envy, okay? And I have to admit that I got interested in envy because of this political split we have in the US between the poor and the rich and all this kind of stuff, okay? So I thought, well, if people could downregulate their feelings of envy, maybe then we have less of a split and people talk to each other and solve problems, okay? So how can you downregulate envy? Can you even make simple if-then plans to downregulate envy? So we started out with first reviewing the literature on envy and the self-regulation of envy, and it turns out that envy negatively affects people's trust in their envy targets, and consequently, it leads to more inferior decisions in social interactions, such as negotiations. So it's important for us, okay, to downregulate our envy feelings if we want to get along with other people, okay? Now, the current study, the first study here, aims to investigate whether implementation intentions can successfully upregulate envious negotiators' trust in their envied counterpart, thereby improving the quality of their decision making. So we create envy in one of two people who have to negotiate a problem, okay? And then we check whether downregulating this envy leads to better negotiation outcomes, okay? So participants were German university students, and they were randomly assigned to control or the implementation intention condition. And in both conditions, interacted with an alleged counterpart, but this was actually a confederate we had trained, okay? And were induced with an envious experience. And then they had to complete the experience via Zoom, and the completion requested a negotiation. They had to negotiate a selling of a car, buying, selling of a car problem, okay? Now, envy induction was done like this. Participants were invited to participate in a Zoom experiment online. Now, in each session, we had the experimenter and two participants, and one of the participants was a trained confederate, okay? And the participants were asked to answer 4 questions on how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected their university life. And there were questions like, how well do you perform academically these days? How does COVID-19 affect your life, and so forth? And then participants had to exchange their answers with the other participant. And then here is the answers of the confederate, you know, that we had already pre-programmed, okay? And the confederate was more or less showing off. It's easy for me to get good grades, you know, have to work during the pandemic because my parents, I don't have to work because my parents are supporting me financially. My life is basically the same as it was before the pandemic. I can hang out with my friends and have parties together. And then we played this information, his answers, to the real participant, you know, and you can imagine what happened. They were awfully envious of the other participants. The confederate but they didn't know that this was a Confederate. Yeah. Now, here is how the whole experiment runs off. The participants were then, after this envy induction, okay, asked to engage in an interactive negotiation task with the counterpart, the Confederate, and the participant was the seller of the car, and the Confederate was the buyer of the car. And the car had different aspects that needed to be negotiated, like the price, like the color, like God knows what, okay? And how good it looks and how old it is and all these kinds of things. Now, reading the general information about the upcoming negotiation task was important because they needed to know what can be negotiated, what cannot be negotiated. And in both participants, the Confederate and the real participant, the goal was to achieve as many points as possible. And since this was a negotiation where integrative solutions were possible, okay, if you wanted to make points, okay, you better start off as a participant, okay, not to ask for too much of a reduction of the price, yeah, because then the salesman won't agree, and then, yeah, you won't get anything, yeah. So it's a good strategy is to kind of listen to the salesman and then find a compromise, okay? And in the implementation intention condition, if I feel a low level of trust in my counterpart, then I will remind myself that only full trust helps to negotiate well. And I will tell myself that it is always good to trust other people first, okay? Now, this was the instructions of the implementation intention all pertained to trusting the other person, yeah? So since you were playing the salesman, was trusting the buyer, the customer, okay? Now, trust was measured before and after the negotiation, and in the trust literature, it tells you that you need to distinguish between affective trust and cognitive trust. We did that. But then it turns out that there was a significant main effect of the time point. So when an if-then plan had been formed, these 4 if-then plans I was showing you, when you adopted them, then you were better at time 2 in trusting the other person, the person you were negotiating with. Now you are the Confederate, you are the salesman, so you're more willing to trust what the real participant, the buyer, is saying, okay? So with respect to trust, we found exactly what we predicted. When you make respective if-then plans, trust can be enhanced, okay? Now, the other dependent measure is how well, okay, the people are negotiating in the sense of that the salesperson listens to the interests of the buyer and the buyer listens to the interests of the salesperson so they can find integrative solutions, okay? So they can find solutions where both of them profit, okay? And there is a measure called joint profits of the final agreement, and it's compared to the first offer when they start out negotiating, yeah? And then when they negotiate well, they get a high score on this measure, okay? And the numbers here, they represent gains for both parties, okay? And you can see when they are in the if-then plan condition, they increase the profits for both, for the buyer and the salesman, okay? Now, it turns out that forming if-then plans effectively upregulate envious negotiators' affective and cognitive trust in their envy counterpart, and participants adopting if-then plans increase more joint profits throughout the negotiations than those who did not form if-then plans. So it looks like when it comes to envy in our society, when people learn how to downregulate their envy via simple if-then plans, okay, they can negotiate with each other better and more or less create more win-win situations, okay? Now, what we are doing right now is we also look into being envied, okay? As you noticed here, we only manipulated envy. Now we are manipulating being envied. So we tell the participant, he's very envious of you, okay? And what happens then, okay? So we didn't have an hypothesis when we started that, but it turned out when you are being envied, you can't think anymore either, okay? When you are being envied, you cannot find integrative solutions, okay? When you have the feelings that you are being envied, that your negotiation partner envies you, okay? You're kind of brainless in your negotiations, okay? So envy seems to be a emotion that hinders negotiating issues, yeah, that separate two people, two groups, two parts of the society, and so forth. So it's not only an affective burden, it's also a cognitive burden, okay? But there's hope. You make simple if-then plans, and then the problem is gone, okay? But we still need to continue this research, and we have the first data for being envied. We don't have really a line of research yet. I'm done, okay, thank you.
Muy bien, muchísimas gracias, Peter. Tenemos un tiempo para algunas preguntas, algunas dudas, alguna afirmación que quieran hacer. Si alguien la quiere hacer en español, con todo gusto se la traducimos a Peter al inglés. Leo.
Well, hi, Dr. Peter. Uh, I was thinking, and I don't know if, for example, I was wondering if, for example, the if-then implementation can be possible that it's an anticipation of the action, and for that reason can be the real effect and not only the if-then implementation. I was thinking that. I was thinking that in the example of, for example, fear.
Okay.
Okay. I was thinking that, for example, in the example talking about fear, that the real implementation can be that they were prevent, that there will be an action immediately after. So, for example, they would say, okay, I know that in the future, in the next 5 minutes, I would have. I was thinking that, for example, that is the real implementation. No, so for example,
So, yeah, but if that would be true, then the goal intention should work too, you know? I want to be calm. Oh, I see what you mean now. Okay. So the question is, so there is an if-then plan, okay, but then you get into a real situation that is awfully complicated and so forth. and then the critical situation is there, but the if sampling doesn't get activated because your cognition is oriented towards something else, so attention. Well, when it comes to the automatic control of action, yeah, load doesn't play a role anymore. That's a nice thing about automaticity. You see, when you conscious reasoning and conscious control of your action, okay, that occupies your capacity to think. And then you're right, okay? But this conscious control of action isn't there anymore. It's only there in the goal intention condition when you have an implementation intention condition, because then you have delegated the control to the critical situation. And the critical situation, the non-conscious recognizing of that critical situation does the job. Yeah. And it's hard to understand because in classic psychology, you know, the unconscious, the automaticity. So when you think of psychoanalysis, it was always dumb. Okay, we need to control it. We need to kind of the Über-Ich. Okay, the super ego needs to control the id. Okay, no. Okay, our unconscious is so competent that even when we lose our conscious reasoning because we are busy with so many things, the non-conscious still controls our action. Okay, and it's so funny that William James already was saying stuff like that. Yeah, 1890. Okay, and then the psychoanalyst came along and just said the unconscious is dumb. Okay, and then it took years until John Barge came along and said, well, maybe the unconscious is not as dumb as we all think. This is old history kind of thinking. Yeah, so modern thinking. And then he cites all the experimental research done in cognitive psychology, how much of complicated tasks are solved without consciousness being involved. Yeah? And our self-regulatory strategy is more or less capitalizing on that. Yeah? By delegating the control to the stimulus, makes it automatic, and then the non-conscious takes care of you. Yeah, even when you are consciously busy with all kinds of other things. Yeah. And so for the control of anger, yeah, you are insulted, and then you usually, you know, you get so upset because you were insulted, and you check your feelings, how hurt you really are. And then in the classic clinical psychology, they say, well, you need to do reappraisal, and you need to perceive the critical situation differently. The insult wasn't actually an insult, and so forth. We're not going to get into that. We just say, when you're insulted, then you say, oh, well, who cares? Yeah, you see? So it's a different kind of action control, emotion control, but it's not dumb, you know? So you don't need the so-called higher reasoning, yeah? And the so-called higher reasoning is not that smart either, you know, because it's biased by all kinds of things and so forth. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for the question.
Muy bien. ¿Alguna otra pregunta? ¿Alguna duda que quieran expresarle, Peter? Bueno, yo le voy a preguntar algo. I will ask you a question. When you have the envy studies, are you manipulating the feeling of envy, or are you giving them an if-then for a specific negotiation style that will solve the possibility of envy?
We are getting into all of this now, whether it's better, you know, to form if-then plans that down-regulates the envy, or if-then plans that upregulates the negotiation style. And so these are all new questions we need to get into. But this is exactly what we're working on right now. And I like it a lot because we also, when we went through the envy literature, most of the envy inductions, because we talked about envy inductions too, are remember a situation where you were angry or where you were envious, okay? And then they think and say, oh yeah, that was envious and so forth. Now we have developed an alternative strategy to induce envy. We went to the New Testament, and remember there was a vineyard where some of the workers came in late, and then the owner of the vineyard paid all of them the same amount of money, okay, even to those who came in late, okay? And then people were complaining, okay, and then the owner of the vineyard says in the New Testament, are you envious? I'm so happy that they came at all, okay? Yeah, so we thought, oh, that's a great one, okay? So we used a great way of inducing envy, okay? So they came in for a Zoom experiment, and the participant came in on time, and then we said, well, it's a negotiation experiment. We would love to start it immediately, okay? But the other person isn't here yet, okay? And then after 10 minutes, the other person shows up, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm late, and stuff like that, yeah? And then the experimenter says, don't worry, you all get the same money, okay? Now, the envy feeling of the person who was there from the very beginning are enormous, okay? And now we have a real powerful induction of envy, a behavioral induction of envy, and now we can study all of these more sophisticated questions, yeah? So far, our envy induction wasn't strong enough. It was just remember an envy situation in the past, yeah? Or they read a scenario where somebody was cheated or, or it was cheating others and stuff like that. Yeah, but now we have a behavioral induction taken from the Testament, New Testament, and that's powerful enough.
So Peter is actually with Paul and other people doing religious activities now. Very good. Muchas gracias a Peter. Le vamos a dar su